It was supposed to be over. The 12-year-old German Shepherd Judge was retired, broken, as Officer Sam Kincaid would tell his friends. His hips were bad, his steps were slow. His time as a canine hero was done. But Kincaid was wrong. In the middle of Hurricane Opal, a Category 5 monster that ripped the coast apart, Judge had vanished. His frantic officer, Sam Kincaid, was now screaming his name into the howling wind, his voice swallowed by the storm. The search had led him here, to the flooded, churning banks of Coyote Creek, where the water was rising fast, and that's when he finally saw him. The old dog was half submerged in the icy water, trembling, barely alive. A faint, weak growl rattled in his chest. He wasn't alone. He was guarding something. What Officer Kincaid saw huddled beneath his dying partner. A sight revealed by the faint, terrified cry of a baby would leave the entire world in shock. This is a story that proves a hero's heart never truly retires. Before we continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you don't miss incredible stories of loyalty just like this. Just 3 days earlier, the world had been quiet. The only storm at Officer Sam Kincaid's house was the internal one raging inside his partner, Judge. Retirement, for a dog like Judge, was not a kindness. It was a prison. For 9 years, Judge had been K9 unit royalty. A Belgian Malinois mix with the intelligence of a detective and the heart of a warrior. He was a creature of pure, focused energy. But at 12 years old, that energy was trapped inside a body that had betrayed him. Kincaid watched him one Tuesday morning, the sun warming the wooden deck. Judge lay with his back to the yard, staring at the front door. He was waiting for a call that would never come. Kincaid sat beside him, rubbing the stiff muscles in the dog's shoulders. "It's okay, buddy," Kincaid would whisper. "You've earned the rest." But Judge would just let out a low whine, a sound of frustration. This wasn't rest. This was obsolescence. Kincaid's mind flashed back, as it often did, to a sweltering night 5 years ago. A warehouse takedown. Kincaid had cornered a suspect, not seeing the second man hiding in the rafters. A glint of metal, a shout, and then Judge, a black and tan blur, launching himself 10 feet into the air. The bullet that had been meant for Kincaid tore through Judge's left hip. The dog hadn't even whimpered. He'd neutralized the threat and stood over Kincaid, bleeding, until the all-clear was given. He had saved Kincaid's life, and now Kincaid was living with the daily consequence of that heroism. The veterinarians had done what they could, but the shrapnel and bone damage had triggered severe, early-onset arthritis and dysplasia. The hero who could once take a bullet now struggled, painfully, just to climb the 3 steps onto Kincaid's porch. That afternoon, the sky turned a strange, sickly shade of yellow. The first reports of Hurricane Opal began. A monster, the weatherman called it. Category 4, and strengthening. Kincaid and his wife, Sarah, began the grim ritual of boarding up windows. As the first winds began to howl, Kincaid noticed Judge's behavior change. He wasn't scared. He wasn't hiding or trembling like their smaller house dog. He was agitated. He paced the hallway, his bad hips swaying, his claws clicking restlessly on the hardwood floors. He went to the front door, then the back door, sniffing the air as it seeped under the frame. He let out a low, guttural whine. "He's just anxious from the storm," Sarah said, trying to calm him. But Kincaid knew his partner. This wasn't anxiety. This was focus. It was the same behavior Judge displayed right before a raid. He was sensing the chaos, the disorder in the world outside. and his old instincts were screaming at him to report for duty. Night fell. The house groaned as the wind escalated to a terrifying shriek. Then, around 1 a.m., came a sound like a bomb exploding. A massive oak tree in the backyard had split, crashing down onto their property. Kincaid and Sarah rushed to the back window. "It missed the house," Kincaid said, his heart pounding. "It took out the fence, but it missed the house." He shined his flashlight through the rain, assessing the damage. It took him nearly a minute to realize the awful silence in the room. The clicking had stopped. "Judge?" He swung the flashlight beam into the hallway. Empty. "Judge!" He ran to the back door. It was still locked, but the crash, the old wooden back gate. Kincaid's blood ran cold. He ripped the door open, the wind tearing it from his grasp. He didn't even need the flashlight to see it. The massive tree limb had crushed the fence, tearing the back gate clean off its hinges. And Judge was gone. Kincaid didn't even grab a jacket. He plunged out into the night, the hurricane's wind slamming him back like a physical blow. The rain was horizontal, like tiny needles driven by a force of pure rage. "Judge!" he screamed, his voice instantly stolen by the wind. He fumbled for his high-powered flashlight, its beam cutting a weak cone into the chaos. The backyard was a war zone of shattered branches and swirling debris. He ran to the broken gate, his feet sinking into mud that was rapidly becoming a river. "Judge! Come on, boy!" He staggered into the street. It was unrecognizable. Power lines sparked, and the drainage system had failed. Water was already rising past his ankles. He knew, with a sickening lurch, that Judge, with his bad hips, wouldn't stand a chance in this current. The dog couldn't swim against this. Kincaid scrambled back, got into his personal truck, and jammed the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. He threw it into drive, hitting the street, his wipers useless against the deluge. He didn't get 50 feet. A transformer exploded in a shower of blue-green sparks, followed by a downed power line that blocked the road. He was trapped. Defeated, Kincaid slammed his fist on the steering wheel, a single agonizing word tearing from his throat. No. He was forced back inside, where the silence was louder than the storm. His wife, Sarah, found him dripping in the kitchen, staring into the blackness. "Sam," she whispered. "He's smart. He'll find shelter." But Kincaid just shook his head, the guilt already cementing in his chest. "He's not smart anymore, Sarah. He's old. He's a 12-year-old cripple, and I let him walk out into a hurricane." That began the longest night of Sam Kincaid's life. The power was out. The only light came from the frantic flashes of lightning that illuminated their terrified faces. Every groan of the house, every shatter of glass in the distance, made Kincaid flinch. He sat in his armchair, a useless flashlight in his hand, replaying the moment the gate broke. He replayed his promise. The one he made 5 years ago, standing in the sterile white room of the veterinary surgeon, after Judge had taken the bullet. He had held the dog's head, whispering into his ear, "You saved me. Now I'll take care of you. I promise. You're safe." He had failed. He had let his partner, the animal that had sacrificed its own mobility for him, hobble out into a watery grave. The heroism of Judge's past only made Kincaid's failure in the present feel that much sharper. He wasn't just a lost dog. He was a hero Kincaid had failed to protect. When dawn finally broke, it revealed a world that was broken. The hurricane had moved on, leaving a bruised, sobbing silence. The sun rose on a landscape of overturned cars, splintered homes, and a thick brown water that covered everything. Kincaid's personal search would have to wait. He was an officer, and his radio was already crackling with calls for emergency services. He put on his uniform, his movements robotic. His heart was a cold, heavy stone. He had to go on duty, had to save strangers, while his own partner was out there. He got into his police cruiser, the engine turning over with a reliable hum that felt like a betrayal. He navigated the debris-strewn streets, his mind numb. Then, the radio crackled to life, breaking through the static of his grief. It wasn't a call for a downed tree or a flooded basement. The dispatcher's voice was tight, professional, but laced with an urgency that made the hair on Kincaid's neck stand up. "All units in the Coyote Creek sector," the dispatcher said. "We have a confirmed water rescue, SUV washout. Mother has been retrieved, alive." I repeat, mother is alive. There was a pause. Kincaid felt his stomach drop. "We have a missing child, a 2-year-old female. Name is Lily. She was in the vehicle. Last seen near the creek line." Kincaid's blood turned to ice. Coyote Creek. The flooded, raging, violent creek was less than half a mile from his house, the same direction his broken gate had been pointing. Kincaid didn't wait for orders. He floored the cruiser, sirens screaming, navigating a nightmare landscape of debris. The call had placed the washed-out SUV near the Old Mill Bridge, a place Kincaid knew well. It was a bottleneck, and it was less than half a mile from his broken fence. He arrived at a scene of pure chaos. Emergency lights painted the brown, churning water in flashes of red and blue. The mother, wrapped in a shock blanket, was hysterical, pointing at the creek. She was just gone. The search and rescue commander was shouting, dividing the team. "West Bank! I want eyes on every snag, every piece of debris. East Bank, move south!" Kincaid joined the line, his black tactical boots plunging into the freezing, knee-high water. The current was brutal, tugging at him, threatening to pull his feet from under him. The water was a thick, cold soup of mud, gasoline, and splintered wood. Every officer knew what they were looking for: a small jacket, a flicker of color. They knew in their hearts this was no longer a rescue. It was a recovery. Kincaid moved mechanically, his eyes scanning, his heart a hollow void. He was looking for Lily, but his mind was screaming for Judge. He felt a devastating, sickening connection between the two. Had his old, confused partner hobbled down to the creek, only to be swept away, just like the child? He pushed through a tangle of fallen branches, moving slightly further upstream than the others. He needed a moment, a second to process the suffocating weight of his failure. "Judge," he whispered, the word lost in the roar of the water. He was about to turn back and rejoin the line when something caught his eye. It wasn't a child's jacket. It was something dark, snagged on a rusted piece of rebar sticking out of the mud. He waded closer, his heart hammering. It was leather. Thick, worn leather. Kincaid's hand trembled as he reached for it. He didn't even need to pull it free to know what it was. It was a retired K9 collar. Judge's collar. The one he'd worn just last night. The force of the water must have ripped it from his neck. He was here. He was here. "No," Kincaid breathed. He looked at the raging current. A crippled dog would have been taken in seconds. Judge was gone. He closed his eyes, a fresh wave of grief hitting him. And that's when he heard it. Over the roar of the creek, the shouts of the other officers, the distant sirens, a sound. It was so faint, it was almost impossible. A low, wet rattle, a growl. Kincaid's head snapped up. He was imagining it. He had to be. He stood dead still, listening. The wind died for a second, and there it was again. Louder this time. A deep, chest-tearing growl, a sound of pure, desperate warning. It was coming from a massive pile of debris, a tangle of uprooted trees and parts of a shattered tool shed, pushed up against the bank, creating a small island in the flood. "Judge!" Kincaid called out, his voice cracking. The growling intensified. Kincaid began to move, climbing over the slick, treacherous logs. "Kincaid!" his commander shouted. "Get back in the line! I hear something!" Kincaid shouted back, not stopping. He was now separated from the team, climbing onto the unstable raft of debris. He could feel the entire mass shifting under his weight. He saw him. At first, Judge was just a shape, a dark mass of mud and fur pressed against the splintered wood. He was unrecognizable. His body was shaking violently, uncontrollably from the cold. His fur was matted with ice and filth. The old K9 was lying down, his body curled protectively. When he saw Kincaid, he tried to lift his head, his teeth bared. That warning growl was the only thing left. He was too weak to stand. "Easy, buddy," Kincaid said, his voice breaking. It's me, Judge." He thought the dog was just in pain, confused, dying. "It's okay, boy," Kincaid choked out, his hand reaching for his radio to call it in. A lost officer, a dead K9. But then Judge shifted. He let out a painful whine as his stiff hip moved just an inch. And Kincaid saw what he had been growling at. He wasn't growling at Kincaid. He was growling at the water, at the storm, at everything, in defense. Because huddled beneath Judge's broad chest, tucked into the curve of his belly, shielded from the wind and the water by the last remaining warmth of the dog's body, was a tiny human child. It was Lily. She was soaked, her face pale and streaked with mud, but her eyes were open. And as Kincaid watched, frozen in disbelief, she let out a terrified, furious wail. She was alive. She was alive. Judge, the 12-year-old cripple, the dog who couldn't climb the porch steps, had found this child in the storm. He had dragged his useless hips through the mud, found the highest ground he could, and curled his body around her, using himself as a living, breathing shield. The bullet wound in his hip was pressed against her, an old sacrifice protecting a new life. Kincaid fell to his knees on the debris, the world spinning. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Judge, what did you do?" He fumbled for his radio, his fingers unable to work. He finally keyed the mic, his voice shattering over the comms. "Dispatch, this is Kincaid. I found her." The radio exploded with voices. "Location? Status? She's at the debris pile by the old mill. She's alive. I repeat, she is alive." There was a pause, and then Kincaid's voice came back, choked with an emotion that silenced the entire channel. And dispatch. I found my partner, too." He reached for the child, but Judge growled again, this time at him. "No, buddy," Kincaid said, tears streaming down his face. "It's okay. You did it. Your mission is over." He gently eased his arms under Lily. I've got her, Judge." He lifted the small, cold child to his chest. She instantly buried her face in his uniform, screaming, and at that exact moment, as if a switch had been thrown, Judge's head fell. The last ounce of strength, the adrenaline, the duty, it all left him. His body went limp, and he collapsed, his head sliding off the log, his nose dipping into the icy water. The growling stopped. The rattling stopped. There was only silence. "Judge!" Kincaid screamed, juggling the child in one arm. No, you don't!" That's an order, Judge! Wake up! Judge! Kincaid's scream was a raw, primal sound that cut through the chaos. He was trapped. One arm held the precious, screaming life of the child. The other hand was useless as he watched his partner, his life, slip beneath the water. Kincaid, what's your status? The commander's voice was frantic on the radio. I've got the child. She's freezing. And my K9 is down. He's down. Kincaid, in a desperate, impossible move, balanced the child on his hip and plunged his free hand into the icy water, grabbing a fistful of Judge's fur. He pulled. The dog was a dead weight, over 100 pounds of waterlogged, unmoving mass. The old hip, the one that had taken the bullet, was snagged on a piece of rebar. I can't. He's stuck! Kincaid roared. Just then, two other officers, responding to the call, crashed through the debris. We've got the child, Sam, one of them yelled. Kincaid passed Lily over, his arm screaming in protest. The moment the child was gone, he plunged both hands under the water, fighting the current, ignoring the sharp pain as metal tore at his gloves. With a final, desperate heave, he ripped Judge's leg free. He dragged the dog onto the relative safety of the debris pile. Judge was limp. His eyes were open, glassy, staring at nothing. There was no breath. No, Kincaid whispered. This couldn't be it. Not after this. Not after a miracle. Paramedics were swarming. One team rushed Lily away, wrapping her in foil blankets. Another medic, seeing Kincaid, started toward him. Sir, are you hurt? Kincaid ignored him. He looked at Judge, and his training took over. He wasn't a grieving owner. He was a K9 handler. He put his hands on Judge's chest. Not like this, buddy, he grunted, and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. The other officers stood back, a perimeter of helpless silence. They were watching a man try to resuscitate a dog that was, by all definitions, gone. He had used his last spark of life to guard the child. Come on, Judge, breathe! Kincaid yelled, pushing. He stopped, pinched the dog's muzzle shut, and breathed into his nose. Once, twice, then back to compressions. Don't you quit on me? That is an order, Judge. You do not quit. A full minute passed. Nothing. Sam, his commander said softly, putting a hand on his shoulder. Sam, he's gone. Let's get you out of the water. Kincaid just shook his head, still pumping. No. And then a sound. A wet, rattling gasp. Judge's whole body convulsed. He coughed, spraying river water from his lungs. His eyes, still glassy, blinked. Once. He's breathing! Kincaid yelled. He's breathing! Get me animal transport! Now! The ride to the veterinary emergency hospital was the fastest Kincaid had ever driven. He sat in the back of the transport, his hand never leaving Judge's fur, whispering the same words over and over. Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me. They rushed him into the ER. The hospital was running on generators, the lights flickering. A young vet, Dr. Aris, met them at the door. Her face fell when she saw the state of the dog. They got him on the table. He was wrapped in heated blankets, IVs in both front legs. For 2 hours, Kincaid stood in the corner, still soaked in his uniform, mud drying on his face. Finally, Dr. Aris came out, peeling off her gloves. Her face was grim. Officer Kincaid, she said softly, I'm not going to lie to you. It's very bad. Kincaid felt the floor drop out. He's breathing. He is, she agreed. But that's all. His core temperature was 82 degrees, 28 to 36 when he came in. His organs are shutting down. His heart is in arrhythmia. And his hip, the old injury, is severely damaged from the cold and the snag. She paused, taking a breath. Sam. What he did out there. He used everything. He had no reserves. He burned the last of his fuel to stay alive long enough to keep that child warm. So what are you saying? Kincaid's voice was flat. I'm saying the kindest thing to do might be to let him go. Kincaid looked through the glass window at the dog on the table, a mess of wires and tubes. This hero, this legend, reduced to a statistic. No, Kincaid said, his voice hard. You don't know him. He's not just any dog. He's Judge. You will not give up on him. The vet looked taken aback. Officer, I'm just trying to be realistic. Then be realistic about this, Kincaid said, stepping closer. That dog has more fight in him than any 10 men you'll ever meet. He took a bullet for me. He survived a hurricane. He will survive this. Now, what do we do next? Dr. Aria stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, we fight. For the next 12 hours, Sam Kincaid did not leave that room. He sat on a cold, metal stool, and he did what he had seen Mark do in the reference video. He started to work. The nurses had Judge on heating pads, but Kincaid knew friction was key. He took a dry, warm towel, and he started at Judge's paws. He rubbed, gently, then firmly. He rubbed the pads, the legs, the shoulders, trying to force the blood to move, to remember its job. You're not done, Kincaid whispered, his voice raw. You hear me? Lily's okay. The baby is okay. You did it. Now you have to come back. He rubbed for hours. The nurses came in to check vitals and just watched. They watched this exhausted, mud-caked officer refuse to give up, his arms aching, his voice a low, constant murmur. Remember that warehouse, Judge? You didn't give up then. You didn't give up when that bullet hit you. You're not giving up now. At 3 a.m., the monitor started beeping erratically. Judge's breathing grew shallow. He's crashing, Dr. Aria said, rushing in. Sam, you need to step back. No, Kincaid said. He grabbed Judge's head, putting his forehead against the dog's. Judge, listen to my voice. Come back. That's an order. It's an order. He wasn't shouting at a dog. He was shouting at his partner. And then a flicker. It wasn't much. It was nothing, really. The smallest twitch in the dog's left ear. Kincaid froze. Did you see that? Sam, that was just a muscle spasm. No, look. Kincaid rubbed the dog's ear. Judge, you in there? The ear twitched again, this time followed by a low, agonizing whine. Judge's eyes, still unfocused, moved. Dr. Aria stared at the heart monitor. The rhythm, it was stabilizing. My God, she whispered. Relief so powerful it was almost painful, washed over Kincaid, making him stagger. He grabbed the metal table to steady himself. That's it, boy, he whispered, tears finally breaking free, cutting clean tracks through the mud on his face. That's it. You're a fighter. Judge let out another soft whine, his tail thumping once, weakly, against the cold metal. The battle was not over, but against all odds, life was winning. While Kincaid was fighting for Judge's life in the sterile quiet of the vet clinic, a different kind of explosion was happening outside. One of the rescue team members, the officer who had taken Lily from Kincaid, had his body cam running. The footage was chaotic, blurry, and terrifying. It captured the roar of the water, Kincaid's desperate screams, and the unbelievable moment he revealed the tiny, living child tucked beneath the dying dog. The footage was leaked. It hit the local news server at 6 a.m. By 7 a.m., it was on every national morning show. By 9 a.m., it had crossed oceans. The world, already battered by images of Hurricane Opal's destruction, was desperate for a hero. And they got one. Not a man in a uniform, but a 12-year-old, broken K9. Headlines exploded across the internet. K9 Judge, the hero of Coyote Creek. Retired. K9 uses last breath to shield missing toddler. The miracle of Hurricane Opal. People weren't just watching footage of destruction anymore. They were watching and re-watching the grainy, miraculous moment of the rescue. Back at the clinic, Kincaid was oblivious. He was asleep in the metal chair, his hand still resting on Judge's fur, when Dr. Aris gently shook him awake. "Sam," she said, her voice soft. "He's stable. His temperature is holding. He's doing it." Kincaid's relief was so profound, he couldn't speak. He just nodded, burying his face in his hands. "Also," Dr. Aris said, holding up her phone, "you might want to see this." She showed him the news. The clinic's phone had been ringing off the hook. "That footage, it's everywhere," she said, awestruck. "The whole world is watching him." Donations poured in. A GoFundMe set up by the precinct to cover Judge's medical bills hit $100,000 in 3 hours. Letters and emails from children, veterans, and other officers flooded the station. They weren't just sending money, they were sending stories. Stories of their own broken heroes, of dogs that had saved them, of loyalty that refused to die. Judge wasn't just a dog anymore, he was a symbol. Kincaid, stunned, looked at the dog on the table. Judge was awake now, his eyes clearer. His tail gave a weak thump. "Look at you, buddy," Kincaid whispered, scratching his ear. "Causing trouble till the very end, huh?" But the most important moment was yet to come. 3 days later, the clinic doors opened. Kincaid, who had been there almost nonstop, looked up. It was the parents of Lily. The mother, her arm in a sling from the accident, was crying silently. The father held a small, pink-cheeked Lily in his arms. The little girl who had been pale and blue just days ago was now bright-eyed, holding a small, stuffed dog. "Officer Kincaid," the father said, his voice thick. How do you thank a man? How do you thank a dog for this?" Kincaid just shook his head. "You don't have to. How is she?" "The doctors say she's perfect," the mother whispered, stepping forward. They said the only reason she survived the hypothermia was because his body heat shielded her. He saved her. He gave her his warmth." Judge, hearing the new voices, lifted his head. He was still weak, but he was off the IVs. Lily, seeing the big dog, didn't cry. She squirmed in her father's arms, pointing. "Doggy," she said clearly. "Yes, baby," her father said, his voice breaking. "That's the doggy." He stepped closer, kneeling down so Lily was eye level with the K9 on the recovery mat. Judge, the old warrior who had taken a bullet and faced down a hurricane, just looked at the child. He let out a soft huff, and then slowly, he licked her tiny, outstretched hand. The photo of that moment, the grizzled, scarred K9 hero and the tiny survivor, was the photo that truly broke the internet. It was hope, captured in a single frame. It was the image that proved what Kincaid had known all along. Judge was never broken. He was just waiting for his mission. The hurricane left scars on the town, reminders of the night the water rose, but it also left a legacy. Judge came home 2 weeks later. The town insisted on an honor guard. Officers lined the street from the veterinary clinic to Kincaid's house, saluting as the car drove past. Kincaid carried his partner, still weak, from the car and onto the porch. Judge was, in many ways, unchanged. He was still a 12-year-old dog. The bullet-scarred hip, aggravated by the cold and the struggle, was stiffer than ever. He would never run again. But something in his eyes, something that had been dull and lost for months, was back. It was the bright, clear, intelligent focus of a K-9 on active duty. The old warrior had found his purpose again. The press, the donations, the fame, it all slowly faded, as it always does. The world moved on to the next story. But for the Kincaids, and for Lily's family, the story was only just beginning. A new routine formed. Every Saturday, Lily's parents would bring her to Kincaid's house. At first, they watched, terrified, as the little girl, now walking with a toddler's clumsy confidence, toddled over to the massive dog. But their fear was unnecessary. Judge had a new mission. He would lie on the living room floor, and Lily would climb onto his back. She would pull his ears, and he would let out a patient sigh. She would fall asleep, her tiny hand clutching his fur, and he would not move, not for hours, until she woke. He had appointed himself her guardian. The same growl that had warned Kincaid away from the debris pile was now reserved for the mailman if he got too close to Lily's stroller. Kincaid watched them one afternoon, months later. The harshness of the flood had given way to the soft greens of spring. The world was healing. Judge was lying on the newly repaired porch, his head on his paws, sleeping in the sun. Lily was playing in the grass nearby, stumbling, laughing, chasing a butterfly. Kincaid sat in his old armchair, a cup of coffee in his hand, a feeling of peace settling over him that he hadn't felt in years. Lily tripped and fell, as toddlers do. She let out a small cry of surprise. Before Kincaid could even stand up, Judge was on his feet. It was a painful, awkward movement. He stumbled, his bad hip almost giving out, but he was up. He hobbled over to the little girl, his nose nudging her gently. Lily stopped crying, giggled, and wrapped her arms around his thick neck. Kincaid sat back down, a slow smile spreading across his face. He thought back to that night, the storm, the fear, the desperation. He had gone out into that hurricane to find his broken partner, and instead, he had found a hero, stronger than he had ever been. Judge hadn't been broken by retirement. He had just been waiting for the world to need him one more time. Kincaid looked at the two of them, the old, scarred warrior and the child he had saved, basking in the warm, spring sunlight. He finally understood. Sometimes a hero's greatest act of courage doesn't happen in a blaze of glory. Sometimes it happens in the dark, in the cold, when no one is watching. Sometimes heroes wear fur, and sometimes a heart that loyal never, ever truly retires.